Back in the 1980s, my parents got divorced. My dad got custody of us, and we moved down south, but on the East Coast. We were there for a couple of years, and that's when my dad met a younger woman, and they eventually got married as well. Not long after they got married, my dad decided he'd leave his job. He was in the military, but he never really had much love for it. Since his new wife was originally from the same area my dad was from, he decided to move back to that area. There has to be a little bit of backstory to understand exactly what happened. It was my mom who left my dad, and my dad was a real petty jerk. He pined over my mom, even as he was married to a different woman, so even though she paid child support, which my dumbass stepmother normally spent on herself, he wouldn't let us talk to her, and if we expressed any interest in talking or having anything to do with her, he would browbeat us until we realized he wouldn't stop, until we pretended we didn't want anything to do with her. My stepmother's parents lived in Wheeling, West Virginia. The place we lived was in Ohio, but it was only maybe an hour-and-a-half drive away from theirs. None of our side of the family lived very close at all, so the only people we ever visited was them. Other than the time we were in Wheeling, we were always out in the country somewhere. The reason I bring this up is because it explains why I was in the situation I was in that day that this story happened. I actually liked talking to my mom, I just never had a chance to do it. If I tried calling her at home, I would get in trouble. Even if I did it when my dad was not at home, he would know by the phone bill. So the only way I could ever think to contact her was to do it when we visited my stepmother's relatives in Wheeling. I would decide I wanted to go for a walk. No one minded me doing that because they never really cared about me. I would walk through the town and get myself to a payphone. I had to find one that was far away from the house, just so no one would catch me making the call. Then I would make a collect call to my mom. She would call me back and we would talk on the phone for a while. I didn't realize at the time just how dangerous it was for a 12-year-old to be walking around Wheeling at the time. I haven't been back since then in the 80s, so I don't know if the place is still a hellhole or not, but it sure was back then. I didn't care though. I only ever got a chance to talk to my mom when we went over to visit those people in Wheeling. On this day, I went to the phone as usual to make my phone call. I talked to my mom for about an hour or so, and then finally, by the end of the phone call, I noticed something that really frightened me. I could see my stepmother was driving down the street. This was odd, and as a 12-year-old who had a possessive and sometimes even abusive father, I was a bit scared what might happen if he found out I had been talking to my mom. So, in order to not be seen, I ducked away into a side alley. I wasn't exactly sure whether or not my stepmother was looking for me or if she was just out driving. I decided I'd play it safe and walk to the back of the alley and take a different walk to get home. As I was walking through the alley though and about to turn a corner, I heard it. A gunshot. I had never heard a gunshot that wasn't out in the country when I knew someone was hunting. This was an alley in a city and was near me. Looking back, I saw where the gunshot came from. It came from the back porch of a house. There I saw a man lying on the porch, with a guy standing over him holding a gun. I was in shock. I had never seen a person get shot before. And yeah, technically I still hadn't seen the person get shot, but I saw them immediately afterward. What brought me out of the shock, though, was when I noticed that the guy with the gun turned and looked over at me. He seemed as surprised to see me as I had been to see what happened. He looked like he was about to move off the porch towards me. I was scared that he thought I'd seen whatever happened, and I turned to run away. I went right back to the main street and ran off at full speed. I never stopped until I got to the relative's house, and once I was there, I had them call 911. I ended up having to go to court, and fortunately the person who was shot did not die. The shooter ended up going to prison for a long time, though. When I was a teenager, I did have a hard time finding new friends. The reason was that my family was constantly moving. I lived with my dad and my stepmother for a few years, and things were just like that with them. There were even several times when we had moved more than once in a single year. When I left them and went to live with my mom, I thought things would finally become a little more steady, but we ran into the same problems about a year after I moved in. We had to find a new place to live, and I had only been at this new school for about a year. I tried anything I could to keep going to that school after we moved. My mom worked very close to the school, and I would go into work with her and then go to the school. However, this only lasted for the fall and winter. I was having to get up at 4 a.m. to go to work with her, and then sit around for 2 hours doing nothing until school began. So, when I began going to the new school in January, I found myself once again without any real friends, and it was pretty tough. There were a few guys who would talk to me. 2 guys would always be standing outside my French class and would talk to me like they knew me whenever I went to class. They even knew my name, but I later found out this was all a huge coincidence. Interestingly enough, I looked just like a friend of theirs, who also just happened to have the same name. This meant that by the time summer vacation came around, I really hadn't made any friends. I didn't consider those guys friends, because they'd never even told me what their names were. Other than talking to them outside of class, I really had no interaction with them at all. So of course, the beginning of summer was a bit rough for me. I spent a lot of time by myself, and I went walking at night a whole lot as well. I don't really think I expected to meet anyone, especially not by taking late night walks, but for some reason, taking the walks made me feel like I was a lot less alone. Each walk, though, ended exactly like the one before it. I would end up going home all by myself, sitting in my room for a while feeling lonely, before finally going to sleep. Maybe about a month into the summer break, I had a really unsettling occurrence. I was out walking pretty late at night once again. It was pretty hot outside, actually, but that didn't really even bother me. I was walking along the street and past some businesses. There was a car that was parked on the side of the street, with someone who was sitting inside of it. He glanced at me as I passed, but I didn't think too much about it. I just walked by and down the street. When I was walking, I heard a car start, though, and immediately looked back to see if it was the car I had just seen. Indeed, it was that car. I didn't really think anything of it. Perhaps the person had just been waiting for someone, or talking on his phone or something. There was no reason for me to feel concerned about any of this at first. I turned down a residential street. As I was walking, I happened to turn back and glance towards the turn in the road that I'd taken, and when I did, I noticed that car had turned also. Still, this was not weird. However, what was strange about it was that it was driving very slowly, and this made me think that I was being followed. Of course, when you think you're being followed, the thing to do is to take a turn down a different street and see if the car turns and continues to follow you. So when I got to the next street, I turned and went down it. Sure enough, the car turned and continued to follow me down the road. I was a bit worried at this point, of course, but I tried not to get too panicked. It still could have been a coincidence. I would have to make another right turn and see what happened. I made the very next turn, which would have taken me back to the original residential street that I had been on, and sure enough, the car turned again and kept following me slowly. At that point, I knew for sure I was being followed. However, I just couldn't understand why. I figured the best thing for me to do was get back on the residential road and make my way back to the town road I had originally seen the car on. I tried hurrying up and going as quick as I could go. That was when I heard the car speed up, and right when it got closer to me, I heard a sound that sounded like a gunshot. It scared me so much that I ran up and onto the porch of the closest house to me. Then the car sped up and was soon way out of sight. I wasn't sure what to do. I was convinced I had just narrowly escaped a drive-by shooting, but what did I do next? I just decided I would try to walk home and keep my bearings about myself. Rather than walk back into town, I continued taking residential streets trying to get home. I heard a car approaching a few times, but fortunately each time it was not the car that I think had tried to shoot me. I eventually made it home. I stopped taking walks like that at night for a time, however. This is all I can figure about what happened. I obviously looked like someone the guys in school knew. I was out walking every night almost. It was possible that the people in the car had seen me and mistaken me for that guy. Perhaps he was targeted by them or something, I don't know, but it absolutely seemed like the only reason I could come up with for what happened. Not knowing anyone in the town, why would someone go out of their way to try and shoot me? I've lived many places in my life. One I remember very well would be the house I lived in when I was 13 years old. It was out in the country on top of a hill. We had this huge yard, probably about a whole acre, but it wasn't just a flat acre. Being on top of a hill, it of course had curves and things like that. It made mowing the lawn a very difficult task to do. Other than trying to mow up and down the hill, there was something else that I really hated about mowing there. We would always get tons of snakes in our yard, and every once in a while I was mowing, I would accidentally run over one of them. It was this terrible thing every time it happened. Not only did I feel bad for the poor snake getting chopped up to pieces, but it was also quite a disgusting experience for me as well. I do personally find snakes to be very scary creatures as well, so when I would occasionally see one in the yard even when I was mowing, for the most part my reaction to seeing them was the same each time: run away as quickly as I can. There was this one time I was just getting ready to mow the lawn. I went walking around the yard first, trying to spot if there were any snakes around. I did this very often because I just couldn't stand to watch them get run over. If there was a snake in the yard, I would try to mow around it, or I would just do it later after the snake had already left. As I was walking around, though, I began to hear this very strange noise. I couldn't explain it well because I had never heard it before. Looking in the direction of this weird noise, I realized what I was hearing happened to be. There was a rattlesnake in the yard, and it was right next to me. I wasn't sure what to do. I had never encountered a rattlesnake before. I didn't even know that they lived in our area. Because of that, I had never learned exactly what to do when you stumble across one, and I was only a few feet away from this one. I stood there, staring at the snake for several moments. It was staring right in my direction as well. I couldn't call it looking exactly, because I knew that snakes were blind, but if it could see, it would be looking right through me. I didn't move. I was suddenly very aware of my heart rate and my breathing, and at any moment, I thought if I made the slightest move, that snake would strike at me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring that snake down and not moving. It was the only thing I knew to do, so I was just standing there. I guess I was hoping that the snake would eventually leave if I just stood still long enough, but that just didn't seem to be working. I was terrified that any slight move would set the snake off and it would get me, so I stepped my foot back as slowly as I could. When my foot was completely lifted off the ground, I was scared to put it back down. I did and braced myself for a sudden attack from the snake. To my relief, it didn't do so, so I repeated the motion with the other foot. I was going as slowly and painfully as I possibly could, and then, when I was able to take another step back without the snake attacking, I repeated the same motion. When I thought I was far enough away that it couldn't reach me in time, I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the house. I made the mistake when I got home of telling my older brother about the snake. He went out looking for it, intending to kill it. Fortunately, though, the snake must have left the yard after I left. As I mentioned before, I don't like snakes having to needlessly die. I've since found out that what I did was the correct thing to do when there was a rattlesnake around. I was fortunate that I did this, rather than just turning around and running by instinct like I normally did. I hate to think what would have happened if I had done that. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. All the copyright strikes are removed now, so we can get back to business as usual. I'm sorry I haven't been posting as much lately. I've just been really distracted with Monster Hunter Rise, I'll say. but I will get back to posting normally as soon as possible. Thanks to my friend KillerOrangeCat for letting me use the stories from his subreddit in this video. He's been helping me a lot by letting me use some of his stories lately, so be sure to check him out. I'll leave a link to his stuff in the description, and he does really good scary stories as well. They're all really unique, and most of them are original because he gets them himself personally through doing interviews and stuff, so if you guys would like to send in a story or you have a story you'd like me to read, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including links to my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type of story it is, if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious about the art used in this video, I have links to my artist friend in the description below. He makes really good stuff and he does commissions, so be sure to check him out if you like his stuff. And as always, links to the music used in the video will also be in the description in the order which it appears in. Thank you guys so much for watching, not too many updates this time, and I hope you guys have a great day.